Good morning or good day. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here and to join you. I really enjoyed the beginning of today and I took my papers with me just to demonstrate to you what will be my point in this discussion in the morning. And I think Wim So-in, he really encapsulated the whole dilemma that I think we have today about information technology and people. It's really how to connect people and their communities with all the knowledge that exists in the world today. So thank you for that particularly. That was very inspiring. So I've been asked to first give you a sense of what do the disaster trends look like in the world today. Now, you know, the tradition in our community of disaster managers is that we plan for the next disaster on the basis of all the previous ones. And we always get it slightly wrong, of course. I mean, that's the nature of it, but it also means that we don't use all the available information we have, that we don't use the accumulated knowledge and experiences. And today we know so much. So when I'm going to show you my presentation, I actually don't know how to find it. Can I get some rescue from someone who is better than me to find this in the computer? So I'll first give you a sense of the prediction of where we're going with disaster, the trends. And after that, I'll talk a bit about what is already existing in terms of allowing communities, government, local governments, organizations to actually take preventative and mitigating measures, because that's, I think, the era we are in. And thank you. Is it going to come up here? It's there. That's enough. Thank you. Finally, I'm going to maybe outline some of the few things that I believe we can do, and that we now have the privilege to have Google with us for the whole day. We hope to inspire you also for some of the things that we think that you are eminently well placed and very skilled to do. So the trends, this is just to give you a visual map, and this is only in 2011. And I'd just like to go back to, I think it was our old colleague since decades in this business, Bill Berger, who pointed out to sometimes, or all too often, some people would say it's the crowd and the media that decide which is the most important disaster. The scale and the impact, short-term, long-term, cannot be measured on a lot of the data that we today are faced with. So how do we understand that dilemma better? And who is actually, where is the authority that says this is the most critical thing that has happened? It's not, you know, something that is defined by the crowd. So in 2011, some of you have seen the figures, you know, $320 billion lost, 120 of those billions are insured. So who pays for all the rest? How many people are affected? What does it cost? How many lives are forever changed, let alone lost, through all these events that you see? You also see that there is an interesting geographical pattern. So from that you can see big earthquakes, Asia, lots of flooding, Asia. Asia is, without any competition, the most disaster-affected region in the world. Geographically disposed to it, the highest population density in the most exposed areas. These are some of the figures that are historical, but must be used for projecting the future. So 51% of all the fatalities of natural hazards in Asia in the past 30 years. And in the first 9 months of 2011, 80% of all economic losses pertain to Asia. So why is this? Well, it's of course because this is one of the fastest growing economy in the world for decades. But it's also because economic assets are always placed where you got means of transport, which means water, it means floods, and it means seas That's where cyclone hits, and that's where you get flooding. So you are by definition quite exposed unless you plan for it, and even if you plan for it, things change. So just take a quick look at the curves. There's nothing much to say about them except to, if you can't read it, look at the drought curve is quite low here, but it's very consistent. Drought is almost without competition the costliest disaster. It's not the most visible, but because its costs are spread over so many sectors, including poor health, dropping income from harvests, so it's food security issues, etc., etc. One country here in Asia, in fact, China, the People's Republic of China, last year I saw a figure that every year, without any major thing happening, China loses 2.7% of its GDP from water shortage. And that is without any major event. But the highest curves here, of course, are from floods and storms, weather-related issues. The earthquakes are the deadliest and the costliest, but don't happen that frequently, are a lot more difficult to project than the other weather-related disasters. Some of the research shows very clear indicators that socio-economic development helps to decrease vulnerability of people because we are better educated, we have better health, we have more knowledge, we can access all the knowledge that you are ready to offer. But it doesn't do anything about exposure. On the contrary, economic risk keeps increasing in every country in the world, and it increases fastest, of course, in the richest countries, but had the biggest absolute impact on the poorest countries. The only region in the world that has actually managed to get the mortality from disasters down is East Asia. It's Korea, Vietnam, China, and Japan, of course. These are the only region in the world that has so consistently worked on early warning and preparedness, so the proportion of people killed in disasters is going down. All other regions in the world, it's still going up because of the frequency, intensity of the disasters and the exposure of people. Just look at the curves of the economic losses. Why do we talk so much about the economic losses? Well, it's very obvious that if you're going to motivate countries, companies, local governments, and individuals, meaning ourselves, to change our behavior when it comes to risk mitigation and future events. Clearly, the risk of dying doesn't prevent me from doing risky things. So then maybe the economic losses that I incur will change my behavior. Maybe, it's not enough yet. But there are other factors that will come to it. But sometimes we need to start with ourselves when we understand how to manage future risk and to really understand. And I think your community mapping is very interesting because if a community does not keep its streets clean and its drains unclogged, they are unlikely to understand and accept much larger risks than that. It starts at home, really. So you can see here, I just mentioned the biggest economic losses are always from earthquakes because it hits infrastructure very hard. But also all other economic losses relentlessly going up. You've seen these pictures. I'd like to just say that I feel greatly encouraged by your community mapping idea, just having heard that the Thai Prime Minister has managed to get her will through that every Thai school child is going to have an iPad. That's what they're going to use for learning tools. So they have a great opportunity now to make sure that Thailand becomes a safer country. So to go to everything that we are trying to do in the disaster risk reduction community, because we have been gathering, and I'm trying to take a look at the various generations that are represented here, but for nearly 50 years, scientists and engineers have been trying to convince governments, local governments, and people like me that we actually know a lot about disasters. We can help you. We can help you to decide how to prevent. We know what causes death and destruction. Listen to us, please. Well, we didn't. So, okay, there is something that science and technology need to think about, how they communicate with decision makers that have the power over money and direction of countries. So about 10 years ago, the scientists said we have to change the way we do business. Now we need to focus on advocacy, gathering evidence, and getting the evidence to the people that can change the way we do business. So one of the things that is actually to put together the data and try to build risk models for the future. But it's also to bring human issues into the picture. It used to be a lot about engineering, technology, bridges, roads, etc., infrastructure. But what about people? You know, how are they impacted short, medium, and long term? It's actually a very under-researched area. And maybe understanding a lot more about humans and how we suffer short, long term can actually create a social movement for prevention and risk reduction. That's my hypothesis. That's how we got the environment into the agenda. That's how we undid the landmines. That's how we undid cluster bombs. A social movement for better risk management could be a very powerful weapon. Meanwhile, lots of work is being done on collecting data, putting it together, analyzing it in terms of getting projection, and de facto understand what are the instruments available to change the almost inevitable course to more destruction and destroying development today. The Global Assessment Report for Disaster Risk comes out every 2 years. Many of you probably already contribute to it. It's about monitoring of risk patterns and trends and making sure that we all understand the direction of we're going. Looking back, you know, one of the limitations to understand risk trends and what happens to countries is actually the absence of historical data. You know today, and many of you are involved, the governments, countries collect data on almost anything you can imagine. You know, unemployment, health, etc. Most countries do not collect data on disaster losses. I don't understand why, I must say. I just know it's a fact. It was a problem when I worked with disaster relief. It's still a problem now when we do prevention and risk mitigation. So who cares about the community that loses one bridge, one school, and half a kilometer of road? The community cares, maybe the central government doesn't care, but these losses have an economic value and someone has to replace it. And today it's not really clear who pays for all these things. So on this basis, we are today with many of the members of communities, governments, local governments, in fact started to gather historical data and building databases. And together with colleagues who are working on risk models that gather global risk data, try to project future losses for governments. And this has quite an important impact on the government, that suddenly they see, well, up till now, over the past 50 years, every decade we've lost X billion to disasters. We didn't really do very much about it. But now these people tell me, this model tell me that I'm going to continue to use, lose not only 1 billion, but I'm going to use 2 billion, 3 billion every decade to disasters. So maybe it's time to actually do something. And there are good models for risk transfer and risk mitigation. And that's what these hybrid risk models can already provide and have already shown that they have an impact. Roadmaps from lost data to risk assessment. Risk assessment is a word that everyone is familiar with. The challenge is really, how does that risk assessment turn into a disaster risk management strategy? And who turns it into action? There are many meters of good risk assessment models on shelves in every country in the world, in every local government. Who's accountable for all this? And how to turn it into action still remains a major challenge. So inventories of national disaster loss data, this is being done. This is one model that is being used, but as you have all pointed out, it's not so much who is gathering the data, it's that the data has a certain standard, so it can be used by many different actors. So it started already, in fact, a long time ago in Orissa, India, but today it's about at least 40 countries in the world that I know for sure are doing this. And don't think that it's the richest countries in the world that gets the gold star for this. No, no. In fact, many of the richer countries probably have felt a bit less vulnerable to big disasters, so they have not been very quick in doing this. But in Europe, with the collaboration of European Commission and the Council of Europe, they've just started, in fact, doing this type of risk data. This is a risk model that is being developed and used also, and we're using these two models together to actually project future risk. So as you can see, lots of these things already exist. These are all partnership developed models, and putting them together to make them really accessible and useful for the governments that commit to use them for their future planning. I'm not going into the details. I hope many of you are familiar with it, and if not, we have colleagues here who can explain to it. Combined with the technologies you've already discussed here, GIS, remote sensing, makes it possible to understand hazards, exposures, vulnerability, all the things I've talked about. And all the communications means that you've mentioned can improve accountability, because also for us, the access to reliable data and authoritative data is actually the most important thing that needs to happen now. And I'm stressing reliable and authoritative because I do believe, and I think a couple of you mentioned it just now, that the wealth of data sometimes create more chaos than we need. And I'll use an example not from this part of the world, but after the volcanic ash crisis in Europe, which spread to a significant part of the world a few years ago, the European Union did a survey of the European citizens and asked them, who do you trust when it comes to conveying information about this type of crisis? I don't know if you will be surprised when I tell you that the least trustworthy agent for people in Europe at that time was government. It's a very depressing message from the citizen. So who do you think they trusted most? The scientists. So there is a craving for an authority that can say, this is actually the way it is, and probably people believe that scientists are neutral. I don't know if they are, but many of them are, enough at least to gain trust by people. So I think we have I actually believe very much, and some of you mentioned the word distributed networks. I think working with powerful, empowering networks is very part of the solution to many of the challenges. But I also think networks without any sense of accountability are not going to help us. Because in a heavily distributed world where local governments, central governments need to work a lot on approaching each other in confidence, is not really quite there yet. So meanwhile, all of us who actually have data and knowledge in our hands needs to feel very responsible for how it's going to be used. And how we tackle that, this is part of it, but I think you also may have some good solutions and ideas. Now, I come now to the most painful part of this exercise, is to show you how much already exists. All these things are there, but there is no consumer. So this, for example, is from the Philippines, where the Department of Environment and Natural Resources have the most amazing resource base, publicly available. No one is using it. Barely a few people know that it's there. And we had very intense discussion in Philippines earlier this year because of what happened in Mindanao with the cyclone at that time. So it's there. It's maybe even almost understandable if you are an amateur, but it seems no one seems, because there are constant calls that these things should be made available, and there they are. So how do we use them? Same thing with hazard maps. These are maps of vegetation decrease in Metro Manila, one of the most vulnerable cities in the world from every perspective you can imagine. From 75 to today, you can actually see, and from here you can actually predict what's going to happen, both in future cyclones, but also, quite frankly, when it comes to less dangerous flooding, urban growth. Combine these two maps and the picture is very clear. Are the authorities in Philippines and Manila using them? Are the citizens using them to take decisions on where they build their new home? It's a bit unlikely. Urban growth around the industrial states, this is where we had the absolutely devastating flooding last year. So even from this, if we had combined this with the weather patterns, the climatic models, was quite predictable. But it's no point to say all these things. There are always people who stand up and say, well, I predicted this already 10 years ago. The challenge that I think we have is, how can we bring together the types of communities that you work with to turn this into knowledge that is actually acted on? And it's acted on by everyone, not by any centralized authority anywhere, because that's just the end of the story. You actually need people to engage communities, local governments to be equipped to do it. So I just keep showing you everything that's there. There is also a huge portal here in Asia on disaster risk reduction projects. Maybe you're already in it, otherwise please take a look and see where you can join in. There is knowledge for policymakers, and you can actually zoom in. I think we saw that already on some of the Google Maps. I think one of the greatest potential and a vision that probably is implementable in a very short time frame is to have a place to say, what are my risks, or is my home at risk? But not just from external hazards, also including risks that are my sort of local behavior. So that's one of the visions that maybe together we can look at. Here is another very excellent tool that already exists. Alerts on mobile devices. Because most of us are still, many people are still paper bound. Many people, of course, do not have access or don't use iPads, iPhones, etc. I personally did not believe in Twitter until a few months ago when I came to a country in this region where someone told me, oh, we are following you on Twitter. I said, why? And he said, well, you know, in my country, 90% of all people have cell phones, but only 10% have access to internet. So that's why this is such an important thing for us. So I just have to understand where every country, I think we also mentioned this, that there are very different ways of communicating and accessing information. But most of all, I would like to sort of place with you, if you could please deconstruct the crowd that you do, what you call crowdsourcing. Because if you remember that here in Tohoku, 65% of the people who died were over 60 years old. Do you think they are the people that use the cutting-edge technology most of all? Probably not. And in many countries, women and kids are the most vulnerable group, not because they are not capable, but because of social constructs. So they are unlikely to be the most proactive users of information technology. So let's deconstruct the crowd and understand the messages we get. And maybe the questions that we throw out to the crowd then will become very critical. So that the areas that we actually look at, focusing a lot of the thinking now is many of the countries in the world that are really peak vulnerable are the ones that have the least access to consistent technology, networking, knowledge access not because it isn't there, but because they haven't quite figured out what the question is and how to translate it into action. And if you look at what countries in the world, in fact, are now beginning to collect data about their disasters to use for future work, you can see that there are very large parts of the world that are highly vulnerable that have not even got started, even though they are in the beginning of it. So here are the collection of the box, the things that already exist for us. And we are really promoting and pushing open source data in every way, with the technology we have, with the partnerships we have. What we are working on are the people and the authorities that can use them and should use them. So a few of the things that are really critical to be able to predict future risk losses, and I've seen the opportunity here in the beginning of the morning, is to analyze and understand the contents of the global building stock. But that means the quality of the building, where they are, and the vulnerability. That is a very critical piece of information, and it looks to me that in partnership with Google's and Google-like organizations, we could very rapidly get the global inventory of this. We also have to look at education and awareness, and Japan is one of the successes. Of course, Japan, one of the unique things about Japan is that after every disaster, Japan really learns to be able to interpret and change the way they do business. And this is quite unique for Japan. Few countries in the world are so consistently learning about what they've just gone through and turning it into new policies. Sometimes maybe not very rapidly. I'm sure many of my Japanese colleagues here would say that. It's not quick enough. But it is happening, and it's a model for many other countries. So this is my old Nokia phone that I recognized. It's probably my first mobile cell phone. But this is the phone that most people have that I meet when I travel around. And it's unique that, in a country like Bangladesh, well over 90% of the population have 1 or 2 cell phones. And they use it for many things. How can we connect with them so that they actually can connect to many of these things that you have offered here? And how can we use it not just to push out the data that we have, but for more consistent education, risk education, risk awareness, because early warnings that go out and people don't know what to do when the early warning comes. And that's it's not just a glitch, it's a huge gap. You may think that the biggest problem today is that there isn't enough early warning. I would say there aren't enough people who understand what to do when they get the early warning. Sometimes it's because what they are warned about has never happened before. Because the nature of disasters is more unpredictability, and in places where they never happened before. So who is taking care of that consistent education? Who is doing evacuation plans? Who actually looks into what I understand about critical disasters? So I think that's sort of really one of the major opportunities. How can you turn all these instruments that you've already somehow tested in relief and response and turn them into preparedness and education opportunities for people who now have to prepare for a future that looks a bit different? They have the information is available globally, regionally, not yet locally with the precision we would like to, but the people who are there have not yet started asking the question, how is my region, my locality, my city, my country going to be affected by the global changes today? Governments ask it, local government increasingly ask it, individuals and communities are not yet quite asking it. And I just finished with one anecdote, and that's why I'm pushing this so much about people, because I think we know so much today, but we don't know enough at all about why our risk perception as individuals is so unpredictable. And one of the case studies that in fact comes from the United States, from the East Coast, I think, people were asked, this hurricane belt, and people were asked how they insure themselves and their property. And in the area of United States that almost without fail is hit by hurricanes, people seem to, in fact, always insure their car before they insure their house. So they were more important for them to keep their car safe than to make sure that the roof of the house was sitting still. Now, you may say this is rational economic behavior, because then they can get into the car, they can work, they can earn money to pay for the new roof or something like that. I think the answer is probably not that simple. I think we are not terribly inclined to believe that risk is for us. We think risk belongs to somebody else. And that's why I think the whole education process of what risk means to us is the most important thing that this community can help us to move in the next few years. Thank you.